Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Jerich Show. I, as always, am Javad Malik, and we have an action-packed episode for you today. We talk about ransomware, more ransomware, but also we have a very special guest who I'm delighted to have on the show today. It's Jim from Safeguard Cyber.
Welcome to the Jerich Show, featuring your hosts, Javad Malik and Eric Krohn. Timely topics, poorly presented.
Hello, everyone. Eric, you're here again.
I am. I made it. I made it again. You can't get rid of me that easily, man.
Cool. And we have got Jim from Safeguard Cyber. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here and watching your opening credits. I'm also looking forward to my next career as your Steve Higgins hype man announcer, maybe even theme song maker coming up. So when you guys hit the big time in a decade or so, I'll be ready to join you as the announcer.
Yeah. Nice. Our big time goal is actually to have more than 4 regular listeners. So once we're close, we're real close.
I can feel it. It's good to be here.
So anyway, let's dive straight into it. And okay, get your puns ready, gents. I know you're both itching for it.
You already missed one opportunity.
I know, I have, haven't I? It's all these buttons I've got to control and make sure the screens are all set up right. That I can't think about too many things at the same time. But JBS, meat manufacturer, producer, whatever, cleaner, slaughterer. They got slaughtered by ransomware. And the REvil gang is behind the attack, according to the FBI. What are your thoughts, Eric?
Yeah, so first of all, this is a story I can really sink my teeth into. Yeah, let's get started like that. Okay, yeah. Anyways, this was pretty big, kind of on the heels of what happened with the pipeline thing here. Now we got a hit in this major meat producer. They're not the manufacturer. The animals actually produce the meat. So let's be clear on that. But they are a major distributor. And it's really kind of shaken some things up, quite frankly. And of course, they got hit again by REvil or Soda. I've never been able to say that one right. There's a couple other names to that. REvil being, here's a little bit of trivia for you, apparently based on Resident Evil. That's where the name comes from. How about that, huh? Also a RAS service, ransomware is a service, and one of the major players in some of these pretty significant hits. So this is really kind of shaking things up a little bit. I know even locally here, friends, family, they were kind of freaking out. They're going, oh, meat prices are going to go up like gas prices did. People are going to be hoarding chicken now and I don't know, stuffing it in trash cans in the back of their car and doing whatever. But, I don't know if it did or not, but it may take a little bit of a hit on some of the meat prices. But this kind of stuff is kind of getting out of hand, and like you mentioned in the beginning here, Javad, this is the ransomware story show. And it's not like we try to just find ransomware stories, but that's what's hitting hard all this week. So unfortunately, we have to deal with this and we have to continue dealing with this. Now, in this case here, I don't know if they paid the ransom on this. One thing about it, the REvil strain is a data exfiltration strain. So I haven't heard much about that side of things, but there's quite often data exfiltration with it. And again, it is a RAS strain, as we've talked about before. So ransomware is a service. In other words, there's other operators that are actually pulling off the attacks while the group is over here oftentimes developing this stuff. So profit sharing, it's a pretty complicated thing, which is why it's in the news all over the place. But yeah, this was pretty brutal. This took them down, but kudos on them for apparently getting back up and running very, very quickly. So yay for them on that. Yeah. So
cool. They got back into the saddle very quickly. So Jim, do you think this sort of
temporarily, but yes.
Jim, do you think this is it's no longer a rare occurrence? Is it medium or well done?
I do think I remember my this reminds me of my 7th grade health class, and they taught you the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like what are the basic human needs. And if you think about the ransomware events over the last several weeks, you've got fuel, you've got the Irish Department of Health, so you've got your own personal welfare. Now we've got food. It's like the Maslow's hierarchy has gotten crushed. And the only thing left we've got is like self-actuation or whatever it is that is kind of at the bottom of the hierarchy. So somebody's going to attack like the Calm app at this point. So none of us are going to be able to meditate anymore. But in all sincerity, we're moving from a world where ransomware was a fractional event that security leaders would have to worry about every year. And now it's more like the common cold, where you're going to get it every year. You're going to get attacked and have to deal with it. And so your infrastructure really has to be built around the resilience to respond to it, as opposed to the world of before, where it was like, well, 9 of my peers are going to get hit, but I'm going to try to be that 1 out of 10 that doesn't. So the incidence rates are going to go up dramatically, or have gone already.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of incident rates going up, surprise, surprise, the next story, Fujifilm. I actually remember them as a kid, like when you had those cameras with the Fujifilm reels, with it's like the Kodak or Fuji you'd put in your camera.
Yeah.
And I remember getting told off by my parents often for wasting photos because there's only like 24 or 36 in the reel. Anyway, they're still around. A bit of nostalgia there for you folks. They have shut down the network after a suspected ransomware attack. And I like the wording, a suspected ransomware attack. I can imagine there's a massive image on your screen saying pay up, here's a Bitcoin wallet address, here's how much time you have. And like, I suspect it could be a ransomware attack. But that's them. Fuji, they're actually like 20.1 billion a year company, like with over 37,000 employees. So something I learned.
Look at that. They're into pharmaceuticals now, Javad. I mean, whoever thought about that? They're into pharmaceuticals. Like, is this one of those swallow a pill and it takes photos as it goes down your esophagus or something? I mean, I don't even know how those things kind of cross over into each other. But yeah, it's a big company. It's still a big company, very well-known company. And yeah, wow. So again, likely ransomware attack. You're right. You're right on the money with that one, because when this big thing, of all the things that the digital forensics needs to find out when it comes to one of these, it's not, is this actually a ransomware attack? Because they make it pretty blatantly obvious when these things come down. Now, kudos to them on reporting very quickly on their webpage openly, right? And we always, Javad, you and I, we always like to give kudos to organizations that are clear with the reporting, or at least quick to say, we don't know everything that's going on right now, but this is what we know, and doing it clearly, as opposed to trying to hide it, sweep it under the rug, be real quiet about what's going on. We think there's a huge amount of respect goes out to organizations that do that. And that's what they're doing here, is they're informing people, which I really like. And it does look like this is another REvil attack. So, we got beef, pork, and chicken processors, and now we have Fujifilm. Apparently they got hit with some sort of a Trojan put there by the Qbot. What do you call it? I can't even, botnet. Yeah. So Qbot got in there, dropped something in there. There was something going on with a Trojan there. And now all of a sudden we have this, which is kind of why they're leaning towards it probably being REvil, because they've been working with that group quite a bit lately. And so very, odds are very strong it's the same sort of thing. So again, we're going to have some data exfiltration here, more than likely. We're going to have some other stuff like that going on. But again, here's the thing. This is a huge organization, right? They have money for defense. They have all this kind of stuff in place. And, when we see stuff like this go on, we also have to remember that small organizations get hit. They don't make the news like this do all the time, but small organizations get hit. And one of the challenges I've seen in talking to people, like my chiropractor, we were talking about it one time, and he was like, if these big companies can get hit, what chance do I have? and almost giving up on the whole thing at that point. Like, well, I'll just do my best when it happens. And unfortunately, you know, that's a mindset we can definitely discuss. But company this big getting hit by it just goes to prove, you know, you're right, Jim. This kind of thing is going to happen, or it's very likely to happen. It should be in your playbook for one of the more, one of the more common things that you're going to have to deal with for incident response.
Absolutely. And I feel like the other thing at an event like this really points to, and I wasn't familiar with this before you shared it, Javad, is you got a big company, and so it's about the implications of the big company as well as the third party, and the whole, Fuji sits on top of a gigantic crop of individual companies that could be affected by this, that could be economically impacted by this, that could also have been infected. And so when you've got a big company, it's not only their vulnerability is based on their size, but also, if you will, their depth in terms of supply chain and the like.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it brings that old argument back again. Like in a larger company, you're going to have more resources, like you can throw money at the problem. But then you have such a larger footprint. You have all these communication channels, you have all these third parties, and everything's so complicated that you just don't know which way is up or down. And heading down into the subway, I practiced that one. The NYC subway operator and Martha's Vineyard's Ferry latest to report cyber attacks. And Jim, are you aware of this one?
No, I hadn't heard about this one as well. So clearly, I've been living under a rock. But I can think of all of the vacationers going to Martha's Vineyard that are stuck in the water. So, but honestly, we're back to the Maslow's hierarchy. Now I can't get around anywhere, whether I'm visiting the city or going out to a summer cottage. So, it's pervasive, right? That's an element that's just it's impossible to miss.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you really, the last thing you want is when you're on your way to the third home out there on the water, you really don't want to get in trouble out there at sea. Now, truth is, this one here, this is a very short article you pulled up here, Javad. It gives almost no information. I love that. Well done. Good choice of particular articles to get. But I happened to do a media comment up on this one yesterday, so I know a little bit about it. The good news is, basically, at least on the Ferry side, it basically took down ticketing. So it didn't impact the ships at all. This wasn't a case of, what was it, Maersk that was, kind of hurt by this. It didn't really impact the schedules because they still had schedules running and things like that. But it did impact ticketing, especially new things or cancels or whatever, and getting that sort of stuff up. So they did say that there were going to be some more delays, I guess, in this. The New York City one, I don't have a lot of information on, but one thing I do want to point out here is this is another example of them going after government-run things, because both of these are run by, state or local governments. It's that same thing which we've seen over and over again throughout history with ransomware, where state, local governments, municipalities, those sorts of groups are constantly being targeted because they tend to be under really, really strict budgets, so they don't have a lot of money to hire people necessarily, and they're stretched really thin as it is. Yet, because they're a government entity, they can usually come up with the money if they need to pay the ransoms through one way or another when it becomes critical. They can't just close the doors on the subway and go, didn't have money to pay it, we got to go away. That's not an option. So they know that, and they really try to hit those groups like that.
And the intelligence about what's in their tech stack is all other things equal, easier to find out for a public entity than it would on a private entity. So lots of vulnerabilities. There's some parallelism, right, between now people in New York City are jumping the turnstiles, and now the Martha's Vineyard Ferry, they're jumping the turnstiles there. It's quite an parallel image to see.
As
Yes.
long as they're not doing it with the cars, we're good.
That's an image. There it is.
Yes. Did you see a few weeks ago there was someone that jumped a drawbridge, like one of those drawbridges? It was just opening and they crashed through the barrier and they jumped over it.
I think that was here
news,
in Florida.
It was. Of course. Where else would it be? I thought that was a given.
It's a promotion for the new Fast and Furious movie.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's great that you bring that up, Javad, because I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. When Javad and I did our little trip to Miami a few years ago, we were driving around. Every time I turned around, Javad's like, oh, it's a drawbridge. He was fascinated by every drawbridge in the Miami area. He's like, oh, it's a drawbridge. So, you know, and you got the big one in London. It's not like it's not something you've ever seen, but kind of ironic that you're dwelling on that once again.
Okay. So, do you guys remember Celebrity Deathmatch? Some of our younger viewers might not have been familiar with that. Over here it was on MTV. It was like they'd get plasticine, sort of like Play-Doh replicas of famous people, put them in a ring, and you know, they'd have a fight to the death. And that's exactly what I was thinking when I saw this headline with Biden will confront Vladimir Putin about ransomware as cyber attacks increase in the US. This is the point where I read this and I thought, if only the Simpsons were right on this one and we had President Schwarzenegger in charge, then you know, I'd have money on the US. But
Get to the chopper.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I think this is really interesting because a lot of these stories we cover in ransomware and what have you, the gangs are often linked back to Russian gangs or you know, what have you. So you know, do you think this is going to be effective or not? I mean, is Biden going to say, hey, Vladimir, stop ransomwaring us? And he's going to like, yeah, fair point. Yes, I think we will stop. Or is there any benefit in that, or what's the political play here? I suppose I know we don't typically do politics, but it's a political discussion. I don't know which one of you have. I'm impartial. I'm like in the middle, so I don't care who wins.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that Two Tribes video by Frankie Goes to Hollywood from the '80s, where the Russian premier, and I can't remember if it was Chernyenko and Reagan were wrestling. So I've got that image, which is really hard to think about politics after that. But I mean, honestly, is it going to work in my opinion, is it going to work like a light switch where it'll turn it off? No way. Is it helpful to have a degree of coordination between the political sphere and the commercial sphere in the United States in defending against these kind of attacks and saying that it's not acceptable? It certainly can't. It can't hurt in the world. That's my perspective. I don't know about you or Eric.
Yeah, you know, in this case, I mean, I think largely it's not going to be effective. It's certainly not going to be something that's going to slow things down. But it's essentially putting something on the board that says, we recognize that this is a problem. We recognize that you are the source of this problem. And let's be clear, most of this stuff is not being put on by the Russian government, right? These are groups that are in Eastern Europe that live in those areas that, quite frankly, you know, they don't bother these groups unless they're attacking Russian things, right? We've already had the discussion about having Cyrillic keyboards or Russian keyboards installed and having malware look for that sort of thing, right? So as long as they're not crossing that. So yes, they're kind of harboring that, but you know, Russia's not the only country in the world that does this. You know, there's lots in Eastern Europe, there's lots around the globe that does this. Now we are putting that out there and we're saying, look, this is a serious issue. How far are we willing to go with it? I don't know. Are they going to, you know, throw down and do some arm wrestling, you know, Biden and Putin across the table, you know, over the top style or something like that? You know, what's it actually going to do? But it's kind of like when, if you remember not too long ago, the Red Cross and the Cyber Peace Institute, I think it was, put together a press release that said, dear ransomware operators, please stop attacking hospitals in the middle of a damn pandemic, you know? And it was largely the same sort of thing. It's like, come on, you know, we recognize this as a problem. It's not going to stop anything. It's not going to slow anything down, but it's another step of at least saying we recognize this from the top.
Mm-hmm.
And you're muted, Javad. Fantastic. Wonderful.
I know. I was just lip syncing there. So I think you make some good points. I had to stop the screen share for some reason. I zoomed in and it kept jumping down to the bottom of the page where all those horrible adverts were. So
yeah, I was ready for my pagophagophobia or whatever it's called to get triggered there. Thank you, Joe.
Cool. So that was this week's story roundup. So don't forget, you can listen to the podcast on thejerichshow.podbean.com, or you can subscribe in your favorite podcast app, or you could find us on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at The Jerich Show. And now we're on to my favorite part of the show. No, it's the second favorite part. The favorite part is when Eric leaves, but my second favorite part is where we have our special guest. And Jim is the CEO and co-founder of Safeguard Cyber. I've known Jim for a number of years now. I think we first met back in 2015, I believe. I'm not good with dates, but it feels like a long time ago. And you've been doing some great things with Safeguard Cyber. You focus on the human connection problem. You do a ton of research in that space now as well. I'm a really big fan of the research reports you put out, and you've been growing the business really well as well. So I suppose let's start from the top. Like, you know, what got you into what was the driver behind Safeguard Cyber? I mean, where do you see the problem being, what you're trying to fix, especially with the adoption of all these cloud platforms and remote communication sort of tools?
Yeah, it's, you know, we when we trace the origins of the business back to 2015 and 16, there are kind of two mega trends that we really saw that we pursued as an opportunity to build the business at Safeguard Cyber. One is the one that you've just referenced, which is, you know, whether you call it digital transformation or whatever your favorite term of it is, there's a fundamental change in the way that people are going to office, how they're communicating. And of course, this has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And so the result is the adoption of so many different platforms that companies and individuals at companies and individuals without companies' authorization are using to start communicating. And so back in that time frame, we were seeing that adoption. And, you know, one of the statistics that really caught our attention at the time was how social media communications in terms of volume of accounts was starting to exceed email. And so there was kind of a passing of the torch in terms of kind of predominant communication writ large. The second development that we saw was actually, not to get too geopoliticky, but we were watching the conflict that was taking place between Ukraine and Russia at the time. And many people were following it, particularly the eastern part of the Ukraine, which was contested area. And there was a kinetic war and people were shooting at each other, which is, you know, you're like, gosh darn it. But the other part of it that we really latched onto was that these same platforms that we were seeing as becoming the kind of predominant way of doing business were now being weaponized by Russia as a means of attacking Ukraine. And so we saw nation state going after nation state via the adoption of these platforms, exploiting vulnerabilities, using them as a way in, the spreading of disinformation. And so we said that it didn't take a lot to figure out that it was going to go from nation state to nation state to nation state to company to criminal to company. And even you can see this getting down to the individual level, where these platforms are both kind of this explosion of the new way we do business and communicate, and they're exciting, but they also represent an undeniable expansion of the risk surface that any individual at a company who's responsible for risk and cybersecurity now has to wrestle with, whether they like it or not. And that's what we built Safeguard Cyber is to really help companies come to terms with what that surface is and then how to effectively defend it in a way that's just not been available before.
That's an interesting, you know, the whole social side of things and how it's being used in modern warfare. You know, it used to be, and you know, how many of us know that we used to fly over places and drop leaflets, right? or
Right.
you would set up a radio station on the outside of somewhere, and you'd broadcast into another country's airwaves, right? With propaganda, with information like that, with misleading stuff. All that stuff has taken place over the years, and this is kind of the next iteration. The thing that I see, though, is it's so much more prolific. And it really, really, social media really drives into people's biases already. And the audience that an average person has now compared to the way that they did 15 years ago or 10 years ago is huge. And the fact that it's being weaponized, the fact that these sorts of things are being weaponized by other organizations, countries, whatever. And I'm sure, in many cases, even within corporate entities doing it against each other as corporate, warfare, brand warfare type of stuff. This is becoming a real hot area and kind of a dangerous one if we don't do something about it.
Absolutely. And I would also tell you at the same time that it's becoming a more prolific problem, the tactics have changed. Just, we've done, as Javad, as you mentioned, we've done several independent pieces of research around this. And if you look at the 2016 and the tactics that were used at the time and the nature of the accounts and how the accounts behaved, it was different than what you saw around the misinformation around the 2020 election and the misinformation associated with the COVID pandemic. And by the way, one of the things that is intriguing is to watch, an account that is a bot or a troll, and how it is so able to switch the issues that it's worried about, the language that it's speaking from the account magically to move between these issues. So it's an adversary that is evolving, and frankly, evolving in a pace that I think is faster than an individual organization's ability to combat it. And as you said, Eric, it can be quite damaging and deadly.
So, Jim, do you think we were better off with MySpace and just the stuff when you went to a page and it played somebody's favorite song, and so you had to listen to their favorite song to see the sparkly stuff up there? And for you youngsters out there that don't know what MySpace is, you're kind of lucky. But it was a social platform that frankly I thought was going to be and then Facebook came in and just kind of ran it over. But things have definitely changed since those days.
Yeah, I think, you got two things that I think are really, so the short answer is I wish, but the longer answer is, I think humans are like water, where we just flow wherever there are available surfaces and available openings to go. So humans are naturally curious, and they'll adopt all these new platforms. And I think the simultaneous challenge is that that sense of, I don't know, I'm not a psychology person, but id, ego, superego, whatever it is that you're supposed to talk about. I think people have a lot better as they built these modern platforms and the algos associated with it. They're a lot closer to understanding what's behind the human psychology. And so, it's almost like weapons of mass destruction have been deployed in the current environment. So I'd love it to be a more innocent time, if you will, but I feel like there's so much of the reality of the world that we've just got to face it as it is, and work together as organizations to combat this problem.
Yeah, definitely. So just picking up sort of a few things that you mentioned there, and there's we see a lot of talk about trolls and disinformation campaigns and misinformation campaigns. And oftentimes that's, especially misinformation, is closely linked to elections and influencing the general public and or causing arguments between people. From a corporate perspective, what are the specific threats that we see here? And I suppose what are some of the things they can do to better grab a handle of these things?
Yeah, so one of the things that's been interesting, right, and you guys have talked about this dynamic of misinformation is a tool in the arsenal, and often it is a tool that is a means by which you distract I think as you guys have talked about previously, from another tactic that's out there. And so the reason that we got excited about what the defense of what we call this digital risk surface. So if you're talking about Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or WhatsApp or Slack as an example, part of the reason that we got excited about it is because all of those accounts are endpoints, if you will, which means that if you think about the way that you defend your email and you defend your network, why wouldn't you want to be able to inspect the files and the links and the language, if it's social engineering, that's coming in via those individual accounts, whether it's a direct message or it's an end-to-end encrypted message. Those are, if I'm a cyber criminal, I don't say, well, I got to use email or I got to attack via this particular method. I'm just looking for a way in. And the adoption of these channels has proliferated the doors that are in the organization. And so all of those doors represent a means of ingress in terms of the insertion of files, the insertion of links, the propagation of social engineering. And so, we saw the opportunity where you've got a whole bunch of these new endpoints and the engineering challenge associated with how do you defend those new endpoints? And then how do you think about those endpoints in conjunction with existing, hardware endpoints that might together represent intelligence associated with an attack? And then, even further, and this is something I think both Safeguard Cyber as well as the company that you guys work at and know before hold, is that we're talking about protecting all of these proliferation of apps. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to protect is the human, because it's the human who's adopting all of these things. And so if you lose sight of the human, you lose sight of the ability to protect them. And so that's what's got us excited, is we feel like there are analogs to a lot of other cybersecurity companies and that we're defending at an endpoint. But we've also got this mission, which is the human is always going to be in the center of business, and you've got to figure out a way to protect them, frankly, so often whether they like it or not.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think when you talk about it in terms of endpoints, it just brings it to light, because say I've got someone like Eric, if he emails me at work internally, it's fine, his email comes through. But if he emails me from his personal account to my work account, I'll get a flag up on the email saying, hey, this name looks similar to someone who works in your organization. Are you sure it's him?
We know that,
which is
yeah,
which is great for work, for email. But then when he Slacks me, or when he WhatsApps me, or when he texts me, when he calls me up crying at 3 a.m. because his therapist wasn't available, I've got none of those tools available on any of these other multitude of channels that he's trying to contact me. So I think having that understanding is really important, because today email is probably the number one attack avenue for enterprises, but I don't think that's going to be the case for a few years down the line.
Absolutely. In fact, I can tell you, we've got a customer, is a pharmaceutical customer, and when the pandemic hit, they were left with email as the only way that they could communicate with the doctors. And what they found is doctors didn't respond to emails. And then they started using WhatsApp as a means by which they could communicate with the doctors. And literally, the hit rate went up about 40 times in terms of the response rate. So you send somebody a WhatsApp and they were responding to it. The doctors were responding. So it was great in the sense of they could respond to the pandemic. It was terrible in the sense that all of those defenses that they had in place associated with communication and email were now no longer available. And so, we get involved because now you've got to try to protect that new means of communication back and forth. And people are doing it because it's more effective than other communication tools like email have been.
So Jim, having thought about that, one of the topics that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and Javad and I have both, we've done a talk on this, and it's something that I've played with, but deepfakes, how is that going to play into what's going on? Because like you said, a lot of these defenses are going away as we go into Slack, we go into stuff like that, but also With deepfakes, people are not aware of these. And I think we're reaching the point of technology where we're actually going to start seeing real attacks, real verified attacks through this kind of medium happening. What are your thoughts on how we're going to defend against that?
Yeah, so I mean, in a kind of a weaponization aspect to it, so there's two different pieces to that I think are worthy of talking about. The first one is, if you think about the nature of engagement, right? I can send a message, I can send a link, I can send a file, I can have a voice communication, I can have a video communication. And one of the things that we're very aware of on this digital risk surface is it's not just about it's not like email. It's not just about, largely content, written content going back and forth. The ability to evaluate risk has to encompass all of those different types of media and different types of risks, right? Whether it's steganography that's inside of an image, or is the image itself something that's a manipulated behavior that the company, for the purposes of misinformation. And so that kind of holistic aspect of all the different types of communication is something we're very sensitive to. But the other part about it, and this may very well be what you guys were talking about, is that concept of deep fakes as a way to propagate the disinformation, misinformation, is really, really challenging, right? Because now you're talking about, it's not something that came into my infrastructure that I can see and respond to as a risk. It's out there, and I have to have a means by which I can find that if it's damaging to my organization, and have a means by which I can reach out and do something about it, which is really challenging. As we've built the business, we've tried to build really close relationships with the different social networks. And part of the reason is because it's not just about the visibility, it's about the response. But it can be a real challenge for organizations.
Yeah. And, you mentioned all these different types of ways to communicate, email, text messages, phone calls, all that kind of good stuff. And we've even already seen hybrids of those where, in a scam situation, an email goes out, says, hey, this is the CEO, I need you to wire a whole bunch of money, followed by a text message that's spoofed that says, I just sent you an email, I need this taken care of now. And
right.
People just drop all pretense of concern. They're, obviously it's legit if I got it from two sources. Now, what if we get a call, and it says, I got to run real quick, but make sure that gets taken care of. I already texted you and emailed you. Make sure it happens, right? All of a sudden, this is going to legitimize things in a big way in the scam side of things, just as much as anything else.
Right. And that's why you have to get back to this concept where, our primary mission is to be savvy about this new digital part of the risk surface, the digital apps and comms that companies are using. But in truth, another big challenge is how do you calibrate and coordinate that with the other platforms that companies have, because the attacks are multimodal, as you're saying, Eric. It's, and so that ability to see, I've got an individual that's being targeted via voice, via text, via WhatsApp is incredibly powerful. And so, we think a lot about that. We've worked on several different integrations that are really built towards that kind of unified picture. We have a big integration with CrowdStrike that's kind of one of a kind for the industry. And the idea is that the more that you have your risk surfaces interwoven so that you can see that kind of systemic approach, the better off you are. Because again, the adversaries don't care. They're just looking for an opening. And the opening may very well be, multiple feints, as you guys have referenced previously.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. Back in the day, we had to worry about networks. Back when I started, it was network devices, what gets plugged into your network and what may come through a firewall. That was all we had to deal with. And now we're talking about crazy stuff. We're talking about, remote access for humans everywhere, connected to the cloud. Half the time the stuff goes straight to a cloud. It doesn't even come in through your corporate stuff anymore. I mean, what a world and how it's changed.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you cannot protect it by trying to suck all the data through a single straw at this point. It's just impossible. And so there needs to be a means by which you can protect, across all of those apps, and something obviously we're excited about. I just want to insert one other element about it, because I think it's important to have people think about, which is the aspect of privacy. When you think about your work email, right, it's not yours. Now, you might think it is, and you buy your movie tickets that way, and you don't give it a second thought. But at the end of the day, the company manifestly owns your email that's coming in and out. With a lot of these platforms, there is a different perception of privacy. And by the way, privacy has become such an issue kind of around the world in terms of raising awareness and protecting individuals and subjects and the like. And so one of the things that we've really thought about as a centerpiece of how do you protect this surface is, how do you provide protection on behalf of the organization while providing the ability to respect that individual's privacy for the underlying content? How do you abstract the IOC from the underlying content? And that kind of capability is essential in this particular world, because it is not like email. It is very different in that the sense of what is private and not is different, has to be respected, has to be engineered in, or else you don't get adoption. And that's certainly what we've learned.
Yeah, definitely. We saw this a few months ago when Microsoft announced their productivity tracker tool that they put out for managers, and it went down about as well as a lead balloon. So it was because, I think that although the intent can be right, you're right. The privacy implications are just so huge there, and also the potential for misuse by poorly trained management, or who might use it as an excuse for all kinds of other things. But it's definitely a massive topic to unpack in its own right, especially as you travel around the world, and with Europe as well.
Absolutely.
So we've spoken a lot about the technology and the approach, and you've done an amazing job with the organization, and I think founders of startups, being a founder of a startup and growing it is no easy task. You see many people fail at their hurdles, and a couple of months ago you were able to secure another round of funding. I think you got Cisco investment involved in that one, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So I suppose there's lots of people thinking out there, like, I want to be a startup entrepreneur, or I've got a great idea. What advice would you give someone looking to break into this field?
Yeah. So I mean, first, it'd be remiss without saying, we're really excited about the round. Cisco, Night Dragon, and which is the fund that's led by Dave DeWalt and the folks at Allegis Cyber. We're all backers for that strategic growth round. So it's a great substantiation of what we're doing, and we're really excited because it's translated directly into expanding the team and as you've kind of referenced a little bit there, thinking about new markets and the like. But putting on my entrepreneur's hat, I would say a couple of things. The first is, I would definitely argue there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur than right now, in the sense of availability of capital, the ability to build a business at scale with the technologies that are available. I've certainly seen tremendous change between the first entrepreneurial effort I ever had, which was in the mid 1990s, and now, just over that 26-year period, the technology has just shifted tremendously. So it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. There are a few things that I definitely kind of subscribe to as lessons learned. One is, there is only one Steve Jobs, and I've heard this a few times, and I think it definitely resonates, which is, there are people who say, a great entrepreneur is just like Steve Jobs. And I really feel like Steve Jobs is a one-off. I really admire the leaders who are more like Tim Cook or Tim Apple, as we were joking about another time, who really think about kind of the leadership and the building of the team and the building of the culture. And so, one of the things is never forget you're not Steve Jobs. Another thing that I'm a big believer in, because I've seen it happen again and again, is there's this entrepreneurial fallacy, which is you believe that your idea is so good, it will sell itself. I literally had my, much more senior co-founder in my startup in the 90s say that to me. He said, we don't need a sales team. This thing is so awesome that it will sell itself. It never did. And we were really successful in the end. But you have to have a mindset which is about the idea that day one, you really got to be thinking about selling. And so that's something that I'm a big believer in. And then the last one is, in terms of, let's call it technical underpinning, I had the opportunity to study with a professor at the University of Virginia at the Darden School, whose name is Sarah Sarasvathy. And Sarah Sarasvathy has a theory that's called effectuation. And I'll spare you the details, but basically what it is it's a lot of a study of the mindset of entrepreneurs and how entrepreneurs don't focus on a specific goal, but think a lot more about the capabilities that they and their partners bring to the table and what they can do to build a business based on what's available to them. And so it's very much like lean startup in its thinking. But I guess I would tell you, if I was encouraging an entrepreneur, I'd say, go to effectuation.org and look at the writing that's there, because there's a lot of things that you'll read about being an entrepreneur and they'll immediately, pop up like a light bulb. So those are a couple of things that are, very top of mind for me in my entrepreneurial journey, and what I'd say to potential entrepreneurs.
Excellent. Good information there.
Wise words, and I'm shocked to hear that you were in your first startups in the mid-90s. That makes you nearly as old as Grandpa Eric over here.
Well,
he's always talking about.
He had to throw the 26 years back then. He had to throw in the years behind that, man. That was just not right.
I know.
Yeah, it was a great time. I mean, being in a startup in the 90s was just, wild. All of those moments of going public and, this is before Starbucks and all of that, and the internet bubble. It was crazy. I mean, it's crazy again. So that doesn't change, but there are aspects of it that were pretty interesting.
Yeah, indeed. Wolf of Wall Street, I suppose, was a documentary toned down.
That's exactly what our business was like. It was totally like the Wolf of Wall Street. Yeah, absolutely.
Eric, can you attest to that? What was it like that when you were
in my experience, which is broad and vast?
Well, he doesn't really have broad and vast experience. Sorry, go on.
No.
Okay, he said no. So clearly I cut him off at the right place. Jim, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I really enjoyed this. We it's, at least for me, it's been a great excuse just to catch up with you again. We should do this more often. And everyone watching, please check out Safeguard Cyber. Tell them that you heard about it on the Jerich Show. And Jim, best of luck, and speak to you soon.
Maybe at Black Hat. We'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.